Hey friends, this is day 19 of Russian all-out war against Ukraine. Two important events that we need to discuss that happened in the last a couple of days, and also I'll give you some news from the field as we hear them from Ukrainian intelligence and eyewitness phones that we're getting on our aggregator messenger apps. So number one, Russia has been asking China for military and economic help. It's become known through Financial Times, and then other sources reported it, that Russia had asked China for military economic help. As we know, Russia has been running out of people, soldiers, machinery, and the economic sanctions are really starting to take effect, and their economy is tanking. So Russia has been doing a number of moves in this area. They've asked Kazakhstan to help them with the war. Kazakhstan had said no, thanks Kazakhstan. They've been pushing Belarus and their president Lukashenko to get involved with the war, and things there are tenuous. We don't know what's happening. Lukashenko had said that he doesn't want to get involved with the war. I think, quote, he's saying they're trying to pull us into the war, but we're not going to be pulled in. All the while, they're giving their territory for Russian missiles and launch of Russian fighter jets to attack Ukraine. But Lukashenko is standing firm on not letting his army to get involved. Although we've seen some footage today that Belarusian army is moving their machinery and troops to the border of Ukraine. So the relationship between Putin and Lukashenko already explained a little bit. It's being they sort of need each other because in case Lukashenko gets dethroned in Belarus, that Belarus is forever lost to Russia because the opposing forces are running away from Russia as fast as they can, and Lukashenko needs Putin because Putin is financing Lukashenko's regime as well. So we don't know what's going to happen with Belarus, but hopefully Lukashenko will prevail and stay out of it. That will be a lot more helpful, particularly for Kiev, because they would straight ahead go and try to take Kiev. So now it's coming out that Russia is asking for Chinese help. Right away after the Financial Times report came out, China had denied that Russia had asked it for help, which probably means that Russia did ask for help and China said no. The idea with China, so you understand, is that about 75% of Chinese economy is dependent on outside forces, on the U.S. And I think it was, who was it? Steve, I forget, but they had a call with China basically explaining to them that if you decide to support Russia, there's going to be heavy economic sanctions. And it is true that China is heavily dependent on the United States. So our allies in the U.S. government are helping us to keep China out of the war. It's also true that Russia has been trying to build relationships with China as opposed to the West, because China is a rising economic power, and so Russia has been trying to polarize their production, their procurement from China, and build that alliance. But as we can see, China is taking all the benefits it can. For example, Russia had gifted China some of its territory. They said thank you, but when push comes to shove, they have to look out for their own economy, and they're not helping. Although it's not entirely clear which came first, them denying that Russia had asked for help, or as we can see, that U.S. U.S. is warning its diplomats in Europe that China had expressed some limited readiness to help Russia with militarily and economically. Militarily, because of course they need troops and machinery. As we know, about 7 or 8% of Russian machinery can actually run consistently. Others either don't start or stop midway. And there's a ton of videos within Ukrainian sources that see that their machinery is basically shit. And economic is because the sanctions have hit hard and they need people. There's also videos from Russian stores with empty shelves. They're running out pretty much of everything because the imports in Russia had stopped. Tons of companies had stopped exporting their goods to Russia, so that they're starting to see some real basic shortage of products. So that's a story we have to keep our eyes on, because if China does come to a realization or to a decision that they will help Russia militarily, that would be bad. That would de facto be World War III. We're already seeing, by the way, that the little elements of World War III are starting to blossom, and it's important for the West to nip it in the bud. So, for example, as you heard yesterday, Iran launched several missiles onto Iraq's territory close to U.S. Embassy, which was preventive or probably a warning shot, and of course this was architected by Russia, and which many analysts say in response to Biden's comments that we're not helping Ukraine militarily. So, stuff like that is worrying. China is huge, and their force is formidable, and we're seeing that if the attack starts from different angles, from different places in the world, then the Western concentration would be spread out, and then could be in for a really bad time. Big story number 2 is that analysts are starting to seriously consider options for the end of the war, and I'm talking about four people more concretely. Number one, I already told you there was a investigative publication called Bellingcat. They're out of Holland, and they are working on high-profile cases. So, for example, you remember that Malaysian airplane that was shot over Ukraine. They were investigating what happened there, and they were the ones who put a report in front of European Commission that this was Russian-backed separatists who shut down the plane, thinking it was a Ukrainian military cargo plane. So now the same agency, and more specifically one of their investigative journalists, Christo Grozev, is saying that there's panic in Kremlin around situation in Ukraine, because their plan A has been distorted by Ukrainian forces because they had wrong information, and all of that line of corruption I told you about in my previous videos. But now there is no plan B, so they're trying to scramble to something to keep the war going, to find a winning strategy. They cannot. Russian elites, and by elites I mean oligarchs, they're condemning the war publicly, so seeing that they are not on board with his agenda. So he's saying that in the next few days there's going to be two scenarios possible. Number one is that Putin will go to the negotiating table with President Zelensky and will have to agree to terms which will not be favorable to Russia. And number two is that he's going to go all in and start to use non-conventional weapons on civilians. And by non-conventional weapons, we've already seen some of this. It's the vacuum bombs and other weaponry, which is prohibited by, I think it's Geneva Convention for war. So he's gonna just go all, what is it called, all ape or something like that. Go all in on his terrorist strategy and start to use truly terrorist tactics. Another source that's talking about it is our own advisor to the president, who's been the speaker for the situation of war in Ukraine from the Ukrainian side. His name is Alexey Arestovich, and like in Ukraine, everybody loves this guy. Arestovich, they talk of him as like antidepressant pill, because whatever happens, he's like, don't worry, this is under control, this is going as we have thought this would be going. In fact, there's a video of him, an interview from 2 years ago, and he's talking about how Russia has no other way to proceed in the situation that they have created in 2014, but to go all-out war against Ukraine, and the way he describes this war was going to go is pretty much what is happening. So very high credibility guy, and he's saying that the most pessimistic scenario is that by May, Russia will be ready for real negotiations for peace, and on conditions favorable to Ukraine. So and he's saying, but this is most pessimistic, but I think maybe sometime in April they will be ready to do so. And as you know, who was this? Was it Merrill Lynch or some other agency that says that with the current pace of economic sanctions, Russia's economy will be decimated by mid-April, so around April 15th. Now this was not Merrill Lynch, it was somebody else. I forget. Anyway, so number 3, Francis Fukuyama. He's a sort of polarizing fella, but specifically for his prediction that liberalism has won all over the world, something like that in the 2000s. But he's piping up on the topic as well, and he's saying he's predicting Putin's defeat. He says that there is no way that under current situation that has happened, he comes out of this on top. And more to that, he says that personally he will not live through the defeat, whatever that means. He's not specifying. Number 4, we're seeing a slightly more pessimistic and gloomy prediction from a Russian analyst by the last name was Asechkin, and he's the one who's been uncovering a lot of corruption that's going on in Russia, a lot of what's been happening in prisons, stuff like that. He's saying that Putin is basically off his rocker, and he's going to start to use his nuclear threat for real. He's more particularly saying that by summer he will be ready to threaten West with nuclear weapons if the sanctions that have been implemented so far are not recalled, if Ukraine is not demilitarized, and if Ukraine has given him guarantees that it's not going to join NATO. So he's going to go all out and say that unless I get everything I want, basically, we're talking about nuclear war. And you guys know what I think about that scenario, which is, even though I'm not an analyst, I know history a little bit, I know politics a little bit, but it's clear as day that Putin has nothing else in his arsenal of negotiation but nuclear war. So whatever, if he's not seeing that he's not winning the war, if he's seeing that he cannot do anything with the political pressure or geopolitical pressure, he's going to use that nuclear threat whatever happens. So the sooner we nip this in the bud, the sooner we help Ukraine win, the better it's going to be for everybody. By the way, one of the main propaganda chiefs for Russia, his name is Vladimir Solovyov. He's openly talking about this. He's like, well, you think we think we're going to stop with Ukraine? Ukraine is just one of the steps on the way to Europe. They're already openly talking that this is not about Ukraine. This is a war on the West. All right, so this was pretty easy to see. So this is not a war against Ukraine. This is a war against the West, and the sooner the West realizes that this is, we're all in this together. Right now it's in Ukraine, but if you don't stop it, it's going to go to Lithuania and further. In fact, two Baltic countries are the ones who are mostly advocating for, number one, Ukraine to become a full member of the EU. This was Lithuania, and then Estonia is asking NATO to close the skies over Ukraine. Why? Because they're right next to Ukraine. They're right next on Putin's warpath. They realize this. NATO realizes this. So Asechkin's predictions are a lot more gloomy, a lot more depressing, of course, but this is not out of the realm of possibility. If Putin feels like he's cornered, he has nowhere to go, what does he have to lose? Right now, he still has something to lose. Right now would be the time to exert immense pressure on him. But by summer, when he sees he is not taking any of the big Ukrainian cities, he will not have nothing to lose. All right. So these are the two big topics. We have to see what happens with on these fronts next, because either involvement of China is gonna alter the course of the war, or we're seeing that Putin is being put in a trap more and more, and he's gonna start to act devilishly at this point. Right, a few more notes from the field. it does start to look like Russia is losing this. Because they're not advancing. Ukrainian army is starting to push back on one of the block posts in Kiev. They're trying to push Russians back to Russia. But at the same time, Mariupol is being leveled to the ground. There is over 20,000 people who have died in that city. And it's not a big city. One of the pastors that I know in Mariupol, one of his adopted daughters was killed by a missile when she walked into her apartment. A missile flew in. She's dead. This is starting to become real. This is starting to have a real personal effect on me as well, because war is not, certain topics become more prominent over time, but what we have to remember, all this time these big things happening, these big topics happening, all this time Mariupol, Kharkiv, Zhytomyr, and Kiev are being bombarded. Real people die. There's real tragedy. Russia keeps shooting at the green corridors whenever people try to get out. They really are trying to make examples like we're not of what happens to the cities if they do not capitulate to Russia. There's a story coming out of a small town of Melitopol, which is now occupied, that the mayor of the town has been abducted by Russian occupying forces, and they're trying to convert him to serve them, to cooperate with them. They've taken them out to Luhansk region and are using torture on him to bend him to their side. Real horrifying stuff, and something that should not be happening in war, according to Geneva Convention. We're seeing that in the last day, Russia has been focusing on destroying military airports in Western Ukraine, which is probably a reaction to the talk about Ukraine receiving Polish MiG-29 fighter jets, so that they will not have airstrips to fly from in Western Ukraine. Of course, we already know that President Biden had personally kiboshed the deal, and he said there's not going to be Polish airplanes in Ukraine. And you guys know what I think about that. We're continuing to receive reports that a Russian army is hungry, and so much so their supply lines have been distorted, both for food and fuel, that there was a directive issued to the Russian army about self-sustainability, which basically means that you guys in Russian army do whatever you need to survive. And for weeks, pretty much since the start of the war, we've seen Russian soldiers robbing farmers, robbing stores because they have nothing to eat. In some cases, they come to people's homes asking for something to eat and sleep in a warm bed, because with the weather in Ukraine, tanks get real cold to sleep in. So this is not a strong equipped army. This is how Russia treats their own army. All right, so friends, that's the main updates. I'm watching the situation closely. I will keep you updated on what's going on, with China, because that's probably the most worrying right now. Then Belarus is another one. Yesterday, I saw a pretty panicked post from Ukrainian side, not the military, of course, but analysts about Iran bombing those objects in Iraq close to U.S. embassy, because that would be an indication of real start of World War III, because more and more countries are getting involved. Hopefully that will not happen, but as we know, Putin is like a back alley thug. That's the best way to think about him. And from his personal history, we know that he has been bullied when he was a child. So this is probably the behavior that he knows. He only understands the language of strength and power. So that's how he behaves in the world stage. Is he tries to do something. If there's not a strong counter reaction from the West, he goes further and further and further. That's why it's important for the West to be resolute in in their actions and in their condemnation and in their sanctions, because that's the only language Putin understands. Friends, I thank you for your support in your videos, for sharing my stuff, for commenting and supporting me in your comments and messages. Also for the critiques, I hear you. But you gotta understand that what I'm doing here, this is not even me talking. This is I'm an amalgamation of what Ukraine thinks is happening and Ukrainian perspective. So if you find it valuable, please share it with your friends. I'm also going to provide a link to a YouTube playlist that I'm putting all my videos on, so people don't have to friend me or follow me on Facebook. It will be just publicly available. I'd love to do another Q&A session. So if you have questions about Ukraine, about this war, about Russia, about what's something that doesn't make sense to you, I'll do my best to answer your questions. All right, have a safe and wonderful week. Bye.